This is a response to the worst argument in all of ever. Part 3, the liar's paradox and a litany of errors. In Part 2, we looked at Izaman's circumnavigation argument. Just to recap, the circumnavigation argument comprised a quote from Mein Kampf and a quote from Hitler's Table Talk. We found that Izaman's quote from Mein Kampf was actually a quote from Dinesh D'Souza. Also, Izaman claimed that the source documents for Hitler's Table Talk were forged. This section deals with the liar's paradox. Firstly, in philosophy, a paradox is an argument that begins with reasonable sounding premises, proceeds through reasonable steps, but reaches a ridiculous or blatantly unreasonable conclusion. An example of a philosophical paradox is the liar's paradox. The standard form of the liar's paradox is comprised of a single statement, the standard form being, "This statement is false." It's certainly reasonable to talk of this statement, and statements can be false. However, the liar's paradox is unresolvable. If we consider this statement is false, then the statement must be incorrect. If a particular statement is incorrect, then it cannot hold its literal meaning, which in this instance it means that this statement must be true. But if it is a true statement, then it isn't false and it must hold its literal meaning. This is a paradox that can really tie you up in knots. The liar's paradox holds multiple forms. Form A we've already mentioned. This statement is false. Form B, I am lying now. By examination of these two examples, we can see that there are two basic parts of the paradox. Firstly, something must be said to be false, a lie, not true or dishonest. Secondly, the condition of being false must apply to itself. Let's revisit Izaman's argument. Step 1. Mein Kampf, written by Hitler, is a book containing public statements. Step 2. Hitler's public statements should be understood as propaganda that bear no relation to the truth but are designed to sway the masses, allegedly from Mein Kampf. The condition that Hitler's public statements are false is met in Step 2, where it says that they bear no resemblance to the truth. The condition that it applies to itself is met in Step 1, when it says that Mein Kampf is a book of public statements. So Izaman's argument is a variant of the liar's paradox, which means that this part of the argument can't be resolved. You recall that in the previous video we discovered that the quote in Step 2 was fabricated by Dinesh D'Souza. What Izaman and Dinesh D'Souza have managed to do is to fabricate utter nonsense. Hitler's public statements could just as easily be resolved by the paradox principle to mean that they are not meant as propaganda by Step 2. I'd like to note that the following is not an example of the liar's paradox. Izaman's YouTube statements should be understood as propaganda that bear no resemblance to the truth but are designed to sway the masses. This is not an example of the liar's paradox because it does not meet the condition that it is applicable to itself. On this basis, it is a valid statement. The word propaganda is heavily used by both Izaman and Hitler. It's a form of in-speak for Catholics because the word propaganda was first coined by the Catholic Church. In 1622, the Congregation of Propaganda was instituted to propagate the faith in countries whose governments were not Catholic. So let's look now at how Hitler and his appointee Ante Pavlik propagated the Catholic faith. And this is also in response to Izaman's text comment where he said, "You couldn't say, well, I'm converted to Christianity, or I'll dig trenches for a living, and hope not to be tortured and killed." Wow, tortured and killed. Anyway, in 1941, Hitler and the Axis forces invaded Yugoslavia. After only 11 days of war, the Axis powers split Yugoslavia up, with Croatia becoming a Nazi satellite state. Hitler appointed Ante Pavelic, a fellow Catholic, as the ruler of the public state. Ante Pavelic executed Jews on the basis of race, but for Orthodox Serbs they were allowed to convert to Catholicism to avoid death. Catholic priests would help with the death squads. Whilst estimates of the extent of the Holocaust in Croatia vary greatly from about 1 million to 1.7 million, the percentage of the population killed was actually much higher in Croatia than in Germany itself. So you were given the choice to convert or die. Were you Catholic? If not, would you convert? Let's now consider Izamen's video. You'll notice a large shift in the focus of Izamen's arguments. No longer does he argue that because Hitler killed millions, atheists are bad. Instead, he is content with attempting to argue that Hitler is probably atheist. To say that Hitler is probably atheist, therefore atheists are bad, would not work anyway. Next comes Izamen's claim that Hitler's upper command are all atheists. As an example, Izamen cites a Dr. Mendel. Trouble is, there was no Dr. Mendel. Dr. Mendel does not exist. Try Googling the name. Perhaps Izamen meant Gregor Mendel, the father of genetics, or Dr. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death. If so, Izamen won the trifecta of errors. Firstly, he had the wrong name. Secondly, neither are in Hitler's upper command. Thirdly, neither one was an atheist. And in conclusion, neither were fit for the purpose of proving that Hitler's upper command are all atheists. Times are tough when it comes to finding a Nazi atheist. Gregor Mendel was an Augustinian priest, and Joseph Mengele was a devout Catholic. So how was Hitler's upper command comprised? Well, Hitler himself was Catholic. Keitel, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Services, his last words were, "I call on God Almighty to have mercy on the German people." Donitz, that's the Commander-in-Chief of the Navy, raised his children as Protestant evangelical Christians. Goering, Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, said, "I am myself a Protestant." So it's fairly conclusive that Hitler's upper command were primarily Christian. Let's recap part 3 of my response to the worst argument in all of ever. We found that Izamen's argument was a variant of the liar's paradox, which means it's an invalid argument. We found that the Serbs could avoid death by conversion. This counters another one of Izamen's claims. Third, it's simply not true that Hitler's upper command were all atheists, as Izamen alleged. This is the end of part 3. You've just watched the liar's paradox and a litany of errors. Next up, in part 4, we look at Hitler's table talk.